So as we've been saying, testing is an extremely important part of the entire system's life cycle of finishing a program. And obviously the purpose of testing is to make sure that when you test the program, it works. So looking at the program that we've just made, let's have an example of how we might go about testing. And obviously you might do this in a completely different way. You might want to develop it slightly differently, depending on what the task is. But here's a suggestion. So we start with a testing section. In this section, we have over here a testing table. That's just going to be the name of the test. So I'm just going to put in a 1 tab to get further rows. Now, a good thing to do if you want to be really systematic, you might want to test every part of your system. So if we look at the program that we have so far, that would be this one. We have a main menu, we have a registration screen, we have a login screen, we have a and we need to test each of these. We could have one long testing table, but that might get really confusing. So it might be a good idea to test each function or screen or whatever you want to call it separately. So we're going to start with that one. Then we could make another. If this is going to work. Test the registration functionality, and this could be another little table there. It's quite fiddly working in Word. Just going to cut that, and that could be different tests that we carry out. An example of a main menu screen test is as follows. So we're testing our main menu. We want to make sure that all the numbers take us to the correct places. That does. 1 takes us to the register screen. I'm not going to do all of them, but for example, 4 takes us to the possible matches screen, and so forth, so on. But an example of these are examples of normal data we'd expect someone to put in 1 to 5, but you could have someone come along who doesn't read instructions and puts in something like that. Now ideally, it should stop the user and say something like, that's rubbish, you need to make a selection from 1 to 5. But unfortunately it doesn't, because I haven't built in that sort of validation. So what I'm going to do is we're going to put these into tests. So I could have had a normal test to ensure when numbers 1 to 5 entered, they go to the right screen. Okay, let's make that a little smaller. Now, this test data is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Expected outcome, each number should take the user to the relevant function. Success, this works perfectly. No further action. However, in test 2, I'm going to put in some abnormal data. You have different types of test data, as you've seen in the testing section on Teach Yourself Python, such as extreme, boundary. So you want to, depending on what sort of thing you're testing it, you might be testing a game, in which case you'd want to test the boundaries, etc. But here let's do an abnormal test. And when I put in rubbish, like that, or I could just say something like text, or anything outside of 1 to 5 input should return the a validation message. test data was this validation message suggesting that the user try again using the correct options. Now the result is an error occurs, does occur, and the system exits. Validation has not been built in. So that's one example of a test we could do. Now obviously, depending on the time that you have, you might want to go back and add this validation. Even putting it in here is going to be helpful because it's actually saying that you understand what validation is. But you might not have time to add validation everywhere. You might go on now for the registration functionality. You're just testing simple things such as the relevant variables are written to file after a user inputs their details. And you could test it with something like job logs, his various data. The details are written to file, success, etc. Now you could add a screenshot. So if you want to really prove that this works, which you'll have to if you're doing a controlled assessment or a project for a class or for an examiner, you might want to add some screenshots. So screenshot 1, and that would refer to that, and that's where you're just print screening or screen dumping or whatever it is you call it, an example of that actually working. For instance, you might want to show the actual file and the fact that it does correctly put that into the screen, put that into the file. So that's an example of the sort of testing you might carry out. A very important section. There's different types of testing. Do read about it and think about how you're going to complete this section.